They called her worthless, cast her into the frozen wilderness to die alone. But the girl they threw away saved a dying wolf, and that single act of mercy would bring an empire to its knees. This is the story of Ilara Vance, the Omega who refused to kneel, and the Alpha who rose from the dead to stand beside her. Stay until the end to see how the outcast became the legend. Hit that like button if you love stories where the underdog wins, and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Let's get into it. Part 1. The Girl They Threw Away. The cold didn't care if you were innocent. Ilara Vance learned that truth the hard way, standing barefoot in 3 inches of snow while her former packmates watched her from the tree line like she was already a ghost. The Ironwood pack had gathered at dawn to see her off, not out of ceremony, but to make sure she actually left. To make sure the Omega who dared say no understood there was no coming back. Move along, Vance. That was Marcus Hale, Beta of Ironwood, arms crossed over his barrel chest like some kind of knockoff bouncer. His breath puffed white in the frigid air, and his expression held all the warmth of a tombstone. You've got until the sun clears the ridge. After that, if we catch you within 10 miles of our border, it won't be exile anymore. It'll be execution. Ilara didn't answer. She'd already said everything that mattered, and it had gotten her here, banished, barefoot, with nothing but the thin coat on her back and a canvas sack containing 1 blanket, a dented pot, and a half loaf of bread so stale it could double as a weapon. Her feet were already numb. She couldn't feel her toes anymore, which was probably a blessing considering what the next few hours were going to be like. She turned her back on them and started walking. Each step felt like someone was driving needles into her soles, but she kept her spine straight. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not yet. Not while they could still see her. Behind her, someone laughed. Probably Sienna. Definitely Sienna, actually. Her voice had that particular kind of venom that only comes from someone who's won and wants to make sure you know it. Sienna Hart, with her perfect auburn hair and her perfect teeth and her perfect life as Garrett Stone's new favorite plaything. Enjoy the frontier, Omega, Sienna called out, her tone dripping with mock sweetness that made Ilara's skin crawl. I'm sure the rogues will love you, or the cold will. Either way, problem solved. More laughter rippled through the gathered wolves. Not everyone joined in. Ilara could hear the silence from some corners, the uncomfortable shuffling of feet. But enough did. Enough to remind her exactly how far she'd fallen. Enough to make her eyes sting with something that definitely wasn't tears because she'd already decided she was done crying for these people. 3 weeks ago, she'd been nobody special, sure, an Omega in a pack that prized strength and dominance above all else. But she'd been safe. She had a place, a role. She worked the kitchens, helped with the younger pups, kept her head down and her mouth shut. It wasn't freedom, but it was survival. She had a cot in the communal den, 3 meals a day, and the knowledge that as long as she stayed in her lane, nobody would bother her. Then Garrett Stone had decided he wanted her. Garrett Stone, heir to the wealthiest bloodline in Ironwood, handsome in that sharp-jawed, cold-eyed way that made other wolves fall over themselves to please him. Trust fund kid playing at being dangerous, with his designer boots and his father's reputation propping him up like scaffolding. He didn't ask Ilara to be his mate. He told her. Cornered her in the storage pantry one afternoon, stood too close, and informed her, not requested, informed, that she should be grateful an Omega like her was getting this kind of attention. You could do a lot worse, he'd said, his hand on the wall beside her head, blocking her exit. Actually, you couldn't do better, so let's not pretend you have options here. She'd said no. Not because she had someone else. Not because she had grand dreams of love or romance or any of that fairy tale garbage. She'd said no because every instinct in her body screamed that Garrett Stone was wrong. Wrong in a way she couldn't articulate but felt deep in her bones. The way you know a storm is coming before the first drop of rain falls. The way he looked at her wasn't desire. It was ownership. It was the look a man gives a thing he's already decided belongs to him. She ducked under his arm and told him, as politely as possible given the circumstances, that she wasn't interested. He'd smiled. That should have been her first warning. He'd smiled and said, "You'll change your mind." She hadn't. He hadn't taken the rejection well. 2 days later, pack funds went missing. A lockbox in Alpha Torin's office emptied. $10,000 gone, and somehow, a witness came forward saying they'd seen Ilara near the Alpha's office that night. late, alone, acting suspicious. She'd never been near the office. She didn't even know where the lockbox was kept. She worked kitchens and childcare. She had no reason to be anywhere near Pack Finances. Didn't matter. Garrett's family had power. Alara had nothing. The trial lasted 20 minutes. Alpha Torin looked tired and annoyed, like he couldn't be bothered with the details. Garrett's father spoke on his son's behalf, such a responsible young man, so trustworthy. The witness gave her testimony with downcast eyes and a trembling voice that would have won her an Oscar. Alara tried to defend herself, tried to explain that she'd been in the kitchens that entire night, that there were others who could vouch for her. Nobody vouched. The sentence was exile, effective immediately. The usual week's grace period to gather supplies and say goodbyes waived. Alpha Torin wanted this dealt with quickly, quietly. Get the thief out, restore order, move on. And now here she was, trudging through snow in the pre-dawn gloom, heading toward the frontier that stretched beyond Ironwood's controlled territory. Wild, unclaimed land where pack law didn't reach, and survival was a daily negotiation with cold, hunger, and teeth. The frontier didn't care if you were innocent, either. By the time the sun actually did clear the ridge, a pale, watery yellow that provided light but no warmth, Alara's feet were numb. She'd tried wrapping them in strips torn from the blanket, but it was a losing battle. The snow had soaked through the fabric within the first mile, and now every step felt like walking on broken glass wrapped in ice. She kept moving because stopping meant dying. The math was that simple. Stop equals freeze equals death. So she walked. The landscape around her was beautiful in the way that deadly things often are. Endless white interrupted by skeletal trees, their branches heavy with ice that glittered when the light hit it just right. The sky was a flat, colorless sheet stretched tight overhead. No clouds. No variation. Just cold pressing in from every direction, seeping through her coat, her skin, her bones. She passed a frozen stream around midday and considered trying to break through the ice for water. Her throat was raw from breathing cold air, and her lips were already cracked. But her hands were shaking too badly to manage it, and she didn't trust herself not to fall in if she got down on the ice. Later. She'd try later, assuming there was a later. The woods were silent except for the crunch of her footsteps and the occasional crack of a branch breaking under the weight of ice. No birds, no animals, just Alara, and the cold and the terrible, suffocating awareness that she was completely, utterly alone. She'd never been alone before. Not really. She'd been lonely plenty of times. Being an Omega in a pack like Ironwood meant being lonely even in a crowd. But she'd never been alone. There had always been people around, noise, movement, the constant hum of pack life. Now there was nothing. By the time the sun started its descent, a pale smudge barely visible through the gray, Alara knew she wasn't going to make it much further. Her legs felt like lead. Her breath came in shallow gasps that hurt her chest. The sack over her shoulder might as well have been filled with stones, dragging her down with every step. She needed shelter. Soon. Or she was going to become a very pretty corpse. That's when she saw it. A cabin. Or what was left of one. It sat in a small clearing maybe 30 yards off what might have once been a path, half buried in snow, its roof sagging on one side like a broken jaw. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and most of the windows were shattered, dark holes that looked like empty eye sockets. One wall had a crack running up it that looked structural. The whole thing had the air of a place that had given up. Alara didn't hesitate. She stumbled forward, her feet no longer quite obeying her commands, and shoved the door open with her shoulder. It scraped across the floor with a sound like a dying animal, and she collapsed inside. The interior smelled like rot and old wood smoke, and something she didn't want to identify. The floor was littered with debris, broken furniture, animal droppings, shredded fabric that might have once been curtains. A stone fireplace occupied one wall, its hearth choked with ash and half-burned logs. The ceiling had a hole in it about the size of her head, and she could see daylight through the gaps in the roof. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She dropped her sack, peeled off the frozen blanket strips from her feet, which had turned an alarming shade of blue-white, and set to work. First priority, fire. If she didn't get warm soon, the frostbite was going to take her toes. Maybe her feet. Maybe more. Her fingers barely cooperated. They felt thick and clumsy, like they belonged to someone else. but she managed to scrape together some kindling from the wreckage of a chair and coax a spark from the flint she'd tucked into her coat pocket. The one thing she'd managed to steal from the kitchens before they kicked her out. The spark caught, wavered, almost died. "Come on," Alara whispered, her voice hoarse. "Come on, you bastard." The flame spread. Small at first, tentative, then stronger. She fed it carefully, reverently, adding splinters of wood until it grew into something real. Something that produced heat. Blessed, impossible heat. Alara sat in front of the fire and cried. Not from sadness, though there was plenty of that, an ocean of it, but from sheer, overwhelming relief. She was alive. Her feet hurt, which meant they weren't dead yet. She had shelter. She had fire. For now, for this moment, that was enough. She ate half the bread, forcing herself to save the rest, even though her stomach screamed for more. It tasted like sawdust, but she chewed it slowly, methodically, making it last. Then she dragged what was left of an old mattress, more mold than fabric at this point, close to the fire, wrapped herself in her coat, and fell into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. When she woke, it was dark outside, and the fire had burned down to coals. Alara sat up, disoriented, her body one giant ache. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. Exile, snow, the cabin, and she wanted to go back to sleep and never wake up. Instead, she rebuilt the fire. The cabin looked worse in the firelight. She could see now that half the floorboards were rotted through, and there were holes in the walls where the chinking had fallen out. Wind whistled through the gaps, making the flames dance. The door didn't close properly, leaving a 2-inch gap at the bottom that let in cold air and probably every insect and rodent within 5 miles. "Home sweet home," Alara muttered, rubbing her hands together over the fire. Her feet were starting to regain feeling, which meant they hurt like hell. She checked them carefully, red, swollen, but no blackened toes, not yet. She spent the next hour doing what she could to fortify her new residence. She stuffed rags into the worst of the wall gaps. She found a piece of wood that she could wedge against the door to hold it more or less closed. She moved the mattress to the corner farthest from the hole in the roof and set up her meager supplies: pot, remaining bread, blanket, within arm's reach. It wasn't much, but it was hers. That night, lying on the moldy mattress with the fire crackling and the wind howling outside, Alara made herself a promise. She was going to survive this. She didn't know how yet, and she didn't know for how long, but she wasn't going to die out here just because Garrett Stone was a vindictive bastard and Ironwood Pack didn't care about the truth. She was going to live, out of spite, if nothing else. The days blurred together after that, each one a repetition of the last with only minor variations. Wake before dawn, if she'd slept at all, which wasn't guaranteed. Rebuild the fire from whatever coals remained. Eat a portion of food so small it barely qualified as a meal. Check the traps she'd managed to fashion from scavenged wire and wood and hope. Most days, the traps were empty. On good days, she'd catch a scrawny rabbit or a bird too stupid to fly south. On bad days, and there were a lot of bad days, she ate snow and tried not to think about how her ribs were starting to show, how her clothes were getting looser, how the face she glimpsed in the reflection of the frozen stream was becoming angular and gaunt. The cabin became her world. She patched the roof with branches and mud that froze solid within minutes. She stuffed more rags into the broken windows until the interior was dark as a cave. She reinforced the door with a plank torn from the floor, even though it meant one more place for cold air to seep through. It wasn't home, but it was hers. That counted for something. The loneliness was worse than the hunger. Alara started talking to herself just to hear a voice, any voice, even if it was her own. She narrated her actions like a deranged tour guide. And here we see the exiled Omega attempting to start a fire with wet wood. Odds of success, low. Odds of frostbite, very high. Odds of losing her mind, let's not talk about that. She laughed at her own jokes because there was no one else to laugh with. The sound echoed in the cabin, bouncing off the walls, and it was so pathetic she stopped doing it after a while. She thought about Ironwood sometimes, in the moments between waking and sleeping when her defenses were down. Thought about the kitchens where she'd spent most of her days, the smell of bread baking, the chatter of the other workers. Thought about the pups she'd helped care for, their sticky hands and their innocent questions. Thought about the few people who'd been kind to her. Not many, but a few. Wondered if any of them missed her. Wondered if any of them thought about the fact that they'd watched an innocent woman get exiled and done nothing. Probably not. At night, the howls started. Distant at first, echoes from the deep woods, reminding her that she wasn't as alone as she thought. Wolves. Had to be. Rogues, probably. The kind that didn't belong to any pack, that lived and died by their own brutal rules. The kind that would see a lone omega as dinner, not conversation. She kept the fire burning high on those nights and slept, when she could sleep, with a knife tucked under her makeshift pillow. The knife was dull and the handle was cracked, but it was better than nothing. Probably wouldn't stop a determined wolf, but it might slow one down long enough for her to… What? Die slightly less quickly? She tried not to think about it. 3 weeks into her exile, the first real snow of the deep winter came. Alara woke to silence, the kind of silence that's actually a sound, a muffling weight that presses down on everything. She looked out through the gap in the door and saw white. Just white. Everywhere. The storm fell silently, relentlessly, burying the world. She watched from the cabin's crooked doorway as it erased the landscape, turning trees into ghosts and the sky into a gray nothing. The wind picked up as the day went on, howling around the cabin like something alive. And she knew that this was the beginning of the end. Her traps would be useless buried under 3 feet of snow. The animals would burrow deep or leave entirely. The cold would tighten its grip until there was no warmth left anywhere. She had maybe a week's worth of food left if she rationed carefully. After that she'd starve, slow and cold and alone. She didn't let herself finish the thought. Instead, she went back inside, added wood to the fire, and tried to convince herself that she'd figure something out. She always figured something out, except this time she had no idea what that something would be. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind and snow and cold, so intense that even with the fire going constantly, Alara could see her breath inside the cabin. 3 days of eating tiny portions and telling herself she wasn't hungry. 3 days of wondering if this was it, if this was how her story ended, frozen in a broken cabin in the middle of nowhere, forgotten by everyone who'd ever known her. On the 4th day, the storm broke. The silence that followed was eerie. Alara pushed open the door, which took real effort with the snow piled against it, and looked out at a world transformed. Everything was buried. The clearing was unrecognizable. The trees bowed under the weight of snow, and some had broken under the strain, their branches scattered like bones. Her traps were gone. Buried. Useless. She stood in the doorway, cold air burning her lungs, and felt something inside her crack. This was it. This was actually it. She was going to die out here. That night, she lay by the fire and tried to remember what hope felt like. Tried to remember the girl she'd been 3 weeks ago, the one who'd thought she could survive this. That girl seemed impossibly naive now, impossibly stupid. She closed her eyes and waited for sleep, or death, whichever came first. It was the whimpering that woke her. Alara had been dozing, not quite asleep, but not quite awake either, floating in that gray space where dreams and reality blur together, when the sound cut through the wind, high-pitched, desperate, wrong in a way that made her animal hindbrain sit up and pay attention. An animal. Hurt. She should have ignored it, should have stayed inside where it was marginally safe, where the fire was, where she could at least die warm. Going out into that storm for an injured animal was beyond stupid. It was suicidal. But something, maybe the last dying ember of her humanity, maybe stubbornness, maybe the part of her that still remembered what it felt like to be thrown away and left to die, made her grab her coat and push out into the night. The cold hit her like a fist. Snow stung her face, blinding her, and the wind tried to knock her sideways. She stumbled forward, following the sound, her feet immediately soaking through and going numb. The whimpering was coming from somewhere ahead, near the tree line, and she followed it like a beacon. She nearly tripped over the source. A wolf pup, small, maybe a few months old, though it was hard to tell with all the blood. Its fur was matted with ice and gore, and it lay curled against the base of a tree, shaking so violently Alara could see the tremors from 3 feet away. One of its legs was bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. Its breathing was shallow, labored, each exhale a visible puff of vapor. It was dying. The pup looked up at her with eyes too bright, too aware, too human, and made a sound that wasn't quite a whimper, more like a plea. "Help me." Alara knelt in the snow, her hands already numb, and stared at the pup. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was insane. She barely had enough resources to keep herself alive. Taking in a dying wolf pup was the kind of decision that would kill them both. It was reckless, stupid, the act of someone who'd already given up. She scooped it up and carried it back to the cabin. The pup didn't fight her. That was the first strange thing. It lay limp in her arms, impossibly light, watching her with those unsettling, intelligent eyes as she kicked the cabin door shut behind them and set it down as close to the fire as she dared. Up close, the injuries were worse than she'd thought. The broken leg, yes, badly broken, bone maybe, but also deep gashes along its side that looked like claw marks, or teeth. Patches of fur torn away, blood everywhere. "You picked a hell of a time to get yourself mauled," Alara muttered, already tearing strips from her already decimated blanket. There went her last source of warmth, but the pup was looking at her with those eyes, and she couldn't. Join the club, I guess. We're both screwed. She worked quickly, hands shaking from cold and adrenaline and the absolute certainty that this was pointless. She cleaned the wounds with melted snow. The pup flinched but didn't make a sound, and bound the leg as best she could with the fabric strips. It was a terrible job. She had no idea what she was doing, but it was something. When she was done, she sat back and assessed her handiwork. The pup looked like a disaster, half mummified in dirty cloth, one leg sticking out at an awkward angle, blood still seeping through the bandages. But it was breathing steadier now. The shaking had calmed to occasional tremors. That had to count for something. "Okay," she said, more to herself than the pup. Her voice sounded strange in the silence, hoarse and unfamiliar. "You're either going to live or die, and I can't do much about either. But you're not dying alone in the snow. That's something, right?" The pup blinked slowly. Once, twice. And Alara could have sworn, absolutely sworn, it looked grateful. She fed it water from her cupped hands, just a little, not enough to make it sick. The pup lapped weakly at her palm, its tongue rough and warm. Then she turned her attention to the fire, which had burned down while she'd been outside. The storm was still raging, and the temperature inside the cabin was dropping fast despite the stone walls. She fed the flames with the last of the dry wood, the very last, she'd been saving it, and tried not to think about what would happen when it ran out. Tried not to think about the fact that she'd just used her only blanket to bandage an animal that probably wouldn't survive the night. The pup fell asleep curled as close to the fire as it could get, its body radiating a warmth that seemed impossible given how close to death it had been. Alara stared into the flames and made a decision that she knew was probably going to kill her. She broke off a piece of her remaining bread, a chunk about the size of her palm, precious and irreplaceable, and set it beside the pup for when it woke up. If it woke up. "You're welcome," she whispered, even though the pup couldn't understand. Even though it was just an animal, even though she'd just condemned herself to starve maybe a day faster. "We're both too stubborn to die, I guess. We'll see who's right." The storm howled, the fire crackled, the pup's breathing evened out into something that almost resembled peace. And for the first time since her exile, Alara Vance didn't feel completely alone. She curled up next to the pup, careful not to jostle the injured leg, and let the warmth of its body seep into her. It should have been creepy, sleeping next to a half-dead wolf. Instead, it felt like the first good decision she'd made in weeks, maybe the last good decision she'd ever make. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, she closed her eyes and slept without dreaming. The pup didn't die. Alara woke the next morning, if you could call the gray pre-dawn light morning, half convinced she'd find a small corpse by the fire. Instead, she found the pup awake, alert, and eating the bread she'd left. "Well," she said, sitting up slowly. Every muscle in her body ached. "Didn't expect that." The pup looked at her, stopped eating, looked at the bread, looked back at her. Then, deliberately, it pushed the remaining piece toward her with its nose. Alara stared. Are you trying to share?" The pup made a soft sound. Not quite a bark, not quite a whine. Something in between. "You're weird," Alara said, but she took the bread. She was too hungry not to. "Thanks, I guess." They ate in silence, watching each other across the dying fire. By the second day, the pup was trying to stand. Falling, mostly, but trying. The broken leg was splinted and useless, but it managed to hobble around on 3 legs, sniffing at the corners of the cabin with intense focus. By the third day, it was eating scraps of dried rabbit jerky that Alara found in the back of her sack. She'd forgotten she had it, and looking at her with an expression that seemed far too knowing for an animal. By the end of the first week, Alara had to admit that the pup was healing faster than should have been possible. The wounds along its side were closing. The tremors had stopped completely. It was putting weight on the injured leg, which should have been impossible with the kind of break she'd seen. She told herself it was just a hardy breed. Frontier wolves were tough. That was all. But she didn't really believe it. She named it Cinder, mostly because its fur, dark gray with streaks of black that caught the firelight like dying embers, reminded her of the ashes in the fireplace, but also because it felt right. Something small and fragile that refused to go out, something that kept burning against all odds. "You're tougher than you look," she told Cinder one morning, watching as the pup limped over to the door and sniffed at the gap beneath. Snow had stopped falling, but the world outside was still frozen and hostile. "We've got that in common." Cinder turned its head and looked at her. Really looked at her. Not the way an animal looks at a person, that blank, instinctive stare, but the way a person looks at another person, with recognition, understanding. Alara shook it off. Hunger and isolation were messing with her head. That was all. But as the days passed, the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. And Cinder didn't act like a normal wolf pup. Normal pups played. They chewed on things. They knocked stuff over and got into trouble and generally behaved like tiny, furry tornadoes. Alara had helped raise enough pack pups to know. Cinder didn't do any of that. Cinder watched. Cinder listened. When Alara talked to herself, which she did constantly now, narrating her life because the silence was unbearable, and Cinder seemed to appreciate the company, the pup's ears would perk up. Its gaze would track her movements with an intensity that felt almost human. And it was growing, fast, too fast. Within 2 weeks, Cinder had gone from a scrawny, broken pup to a lean, muscled juvenile that came up to Alara's knee. The splint came off after 10 days, and the leg healed without so much as a limp. The wounds along its side closed completely, leaving faint scars beneath new fur that grew in thick and dark. It should have taken months. It took days. Alara tried not to think too hard about it. The frontier was strange. Maybe the wolves out here were different. Maybe she was losing her mind. Either way, Cinder was alive, and that was enough. She'd saved something. In a world that had taken everything from her, she'd managed to save one thing. That mattered. She started talking to the pup like it was a person. It felt less crazy than talking to herself. "So here's the thing," she said one night, sitting cross-legged by the fire while Cinder lay beside her, head resting on its paws. "I know you can't actually understand me, but I'm going to pretend you can because otherwise I'm going to go completely insane. Sound good?" Cinder's tail thumped once against the floor. "Great. Glad we're on the same page." Alara poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral upward through the hole in the roof. "I used to have this whole life, you know? It wasn't great, but it was mine. I had a place, people who, well, not friends exactly, but people who knew my name. And then I said no to the wrong person, and now I'm here, talking to a wolf, in a falling-apart cabin, in the middle of nowhere." She laughed, but it came out bitter and sharp. "Guess I should have just said yes, huh? Smiled and played along and let Garrett Stone treat me like property. But I couldn't, Cinder, because he was wrong. Not wrong like bad match wrong, but wrong like rot. Like something broken pretending to be whole. And I knew if I said yes, I'd never get free. I'd belong to him, and he'd destroy me piece by piece until there was nothing left." Cinder shifted closer, pressing its warm bulk against her leg. Alara's throat tightened. She reached down and ran her fingers through the pup's fur, thick and soft now, nothing like the matted, blood-soaked mess she'd found in the snow. "Thanks for sticking around," she whispered. "I know you didn't have a choice, but thanks. It's nice not being alone." Cinder made a low sound, not quite a whine, not quite a growl, something that felt like agreement. And Alara had that thought again, the one she kept pushing away. He understands. He understands every single word. The real strangeness started a month into their coexistence. Alara had gone out to check what was left of her traps, leaving Cinder in the cabin with strict instructions not to knock over the water bowl. She knew it was ridiculous. She gave the instructions anyway. "I mean it," she said, pointing at the pup. "That's our only bowl. If you spill it, we're drinking out of the pot, and it tastes like rust." Cinder had looked at her with what she could only describe as exasperation. The traps were empty, as expected. Everything with sense had either gone deep underground or migrated. Alara stood in the frozen clearing, hands numb, stomach cramping with hunger, and tried to figure out what came next. She had maybe 2 days of food left, 3 if she barely ate. After that, she didn't know. She trudged back to the cabin an hour later, freezing and empty-handed, and trying very hard not to cry. When she pushed open the door, the first thing she noticed was the warmth. The cabin was warm, warmer than she'd left it. The fire had been stoked. Fresh logs she knew she hadn't placed there because she'd been carefully rationing the wood, were burning steadily in the hearth, arranged in a way that maximized heat output. Alara stood in the doorway, snowflakes melting in her hair, and stared. Cinder sat by the fire, looking entirely too pleased with itself. "Okay," Alara said slowly, carefully, like she was talking to something that might bite. That's not normal." Cinder tilted its head. The picture of innocence. "Did you? No, you couldn't have. You're a wolf. Wolves don't build fires. Wolves don't understand the concept of building fires." Another head tilt. Was that amusement in those gold eyes? "You're messing with me," Alara said. "This is some kind of frontier madness. I'm hallucinating. That's the only explanation." Cinder yawned, showing a lot of very sharp teeth. "Fine. Don't explain. See if I share my dinner." But there was no dinner to share, and they both knew it. That night, Alara lay down to sleep with the fire warm at her back and Cinder curled at her side, and she tried to make sense of what was happening. The fire thing could have been a coincidence. Maybe the logs had just settled. Maybe she'd been more tired than she thought and had stoked the fire without remembering. Maybe she was losing her mind. But then Cinder moved to the door and sat there, perfectly still, perfectly watchful, like a sentinel, like a guard. And when Alara woke in the middle of the night to the sound of howling, close, too close, right outside the cabin, Cinder was still there, silent, unmoving, a low growl rumbling in its chest that she felt more than heard. The howling stopped. Whatever had been circling the cabin, whatever had been testing the walls and sniffing at the gaps, retreated into the dark. Cinder didn't move from the door until dawn. Alara didn't sleep for the rest of the night. She sat by the fire, watching the pup. No, not a pup anymore. Cinder was nearly full-grown now, powerful and sleek and nothing like the dying creature she'd found in the snow, and tried to accept what her instincts were screaming at her. Cinder wasn't just a wolf. And she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. The question was, what the hell was she sharing a cabin with? Winter deepened its grip, and with it came a cold that felt personal. Alara woke on the 43rd day of her exile. She'd been keeping count with notches on the cabin wall, though she wasn't sure why it mattered, to find frost coating the inside of the windows. Her breath hung in the air like smoke, and even with Cinder pressed against her side, she could barely feel her fingers. The fire had died sometime in the night, just embers now, barely glowing. She sat up, every joint protesting, and looked at Cinder. The wolf was already awake, watching her with those unnerving gold eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "We need more wood," she said. Her voice came out hoarse, cracked. "Or we're going to freeze." Cinder stood, stretched, the movement fluid and powerful, nothing like the broken pup from a month ago, and walked to the door. Paused, looked back at her. "Yeah, I know. I'm coming." Alara dragged herself to her feet, wrapped what was left of her coat around her shoulders, and followed. Outside, the world had transformed again. The storm from 2 nights ago had deposited another foot of snow, and the sky was that particular shade of gray that promised more to come. The trees stood like silent witnesses, their branches bent and heavy. Cinder moved ahead of her, breaking trail through the deep snow with an ease that made Alara jealous. The wolf seemed completely unbothered by the cold, its thick coat providing insulation she desperately envied. They spent the morning gathering deadfall, branches that had broken under the weight of ice, logs from a fallen tree Alara had spotted a week ago. It was exhausting work. Alara's muscles screamed and her hands went numb despite the threadbare gloves she'd fashioned from old socks. But Cinder helped in ways that should have been impossible. The wolf dragged branches twice its size, nosed larger logs toward the cabin, and when Alara struggled to lift a particularly heavy piece of wood, Cinder positioned itself on the other end and pushed, coordinating its movements with hers in a way that felt deliberate. Planned. "You're not normal," Alara panted, finally getting the log through the cabin door. "You know that, right?" Cinder's tail wagged once. Brief. Almost sarcastic. By the time they'd stockpiled enough wood to last a few days, the sun was already setting, that weak, watery excuse for sunlight that barely cleared the tree line this deep into winter. Alara's stomach was eating itself. She hadn't had a real meal in 3 days. The last of the rabbit jerky was gone, and the traps continued to yield nothing. She sat by the newly rebuilt fire, trying to work up the energy to melt snow for water, when Cinder stood and moved to the door. "Where are you going?" Alara asked. "It's almost dark." Cinder looked at her, then at the door, then back at her. "No, absolutely not. It's not safe out there at night. You'll get—" But Cinder was already nudging the door open, slipping through the gap and disappearing into the twilight. "Cinder!" Alara scrambled to her feet, rushed to the door, but the wolf was already gone, swallowed by shadows and snow. "Damn it!" She stood in the doorway, cold air burning her lungs, and debated going after him. But she was exhausted, starving, and the last time she'd ventured into the woods after dark, she'd nearly gotten lost and frozen. Cinder was fast, strong, and apparently had been taking care of himself just fine before she'd found him. He'd come back. He always came back. She hoped. Alara closed the door, wedged it shut, and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest that had nothing to do with hunger. Cinder returned 2 hours later with a rabbit in his jaws. Alara heard the scratching at the door first. Soft, deliberate. Not the frantic clawing of something trying to get in, but the patient request of something that knew it would be let in eventually. She opened the door and Cinder trotted inside like he owned the place, dropped the rabbit at her feet and sat down with an expression that clearly said, "You're welcome." The rabbit was fresh, still warm, killed clean. Alara stared at it, then at Cinder, then back at the rabbit. "You went hunting. For me." Cinder's tail thumped against the floor. Wolves don't do that. Wolves hunt for themselves, for their pack, but you're—" She trailed off because what was she going to say? "You're not pack?" Cinder had been more loyal to her in a month than Ironwood had been in 23 years. She picked up the rabbit, feeling its weight, and something in her chest cracked open. "Thank you," she whispered. "I mean it. Thank you." Cinder made that low sound again, the one that seemed to convey understanding, and settled by the fire to watch her work. Alara skinned and gutted the rabbit with practiced efficiency. She'd learned to hunt and prepare game as a pup, back when Ironwood still believed in teaching Omega's useful skills before deciding they were only good for cooking and childcare. The meat roasted over the fire filled the cabin with a smell so good it made her dizzy. She ate half and gave the rest to Cinder, even though the wolf tried to refuse it, tried to push it back toward her with his nose. "Don't argue," Alara said firmly. "You caught it. You get half. That's the rule." Cinder huffed, but ate. That night, Alara fell asleep with a full stomach for the first time in weeks, and she dreamed of warmth and safety and belonging, things she'd thought were gone forever. The hunting became a pattern. Every few days, when the food ran low, Cinder would disappear into the woods and return hours later with something. Rabbits mostly, but sometimes birds. Once, impossibly, a small deer that he'd somehow managed to bring down alone. Alara stopped questioning it. She was alive because of Cinder. That was enough. But the wolf's behavior grew stranger in other ways. She'd catch him staring at her when he thought she wasn't looking. Not the blank stare of an animal, but the thoughtful gaze of someone trying to figure out a puzzle. When she talked to herself, his ears would track every word, and sometimes he'd react in ways that felt too specific. She'd complain about the cold, and he'd move closer. She'd mention being nervous about sounds outside, and he'd position himself between her and the door. And then there was the incident with the rogues. It happened on a night when the temperature had dropped so low that even the fire couldn't keep the cold at bay. Alara was huddled in her corner trying to sleep when Cinder suddenly went rigid. His ears flattened against his skull, and a growl so deep she felt it in her bones rumbled from his chest. "What?" she started, but Cinder cut her off with a sharp bark. Then she heard them. Voices. Human voices, but wrong, rough and aggressive, echoing through the trees. "Smell that? Smoke. Someone's holed up nearby. Probably some exile. Easy pickings. Rogues. Had to be. Wolves without packs, without territory, who survived by taking from others." Alara's blood turned to ice. She grabbed her knife, her pathetic, dull knife, and pressed herself against the wall. Cinder moved to stand directly in front of the door, every muscle coiled, lips pulled back to show teeth that suddenly looked a lot bigger than she'd realized. The footsteps came closer, 3 distinct sets crunching through snow. "Hey!" A fist pounded on the door, making Alara jump. "We know you're in there. Open up and maybe we'll make this quick." Laughter, cruel and sharp. Alara's hand tightened on the knife. She looked at Cinder, who hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound since that initial bark. The wolf stood like a statue, but she could see the tremor running through his muscles. Not fear, but restraint, like he was holding himself back from something. "Last chance!" the voice called. "Open the door, or we break it down!" Alara made a decision. She moved toward the door, knife ready, because if they were coming in anyway, she'd rather meet them on her feet than cowering in a corner. But Cinder moved faster. The wolf shifted position, placing himself directly between her and the door, and then he did something that stopped her heart. He growled. Not the warning growl from before, but something deeper. Something that carried power, like distant thunder, like an avalanche starting its descent. The sound filled the cabin, vibrated through the walls, and Alara felt it in her teeth. Outside, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, "What the hell was that?" Sounded like, "That's not possible. No way there's an alpha out here. I'm telling you, that's an alpha growl. Nobody else sounds like that." More silence, tense, uncertain. "Forget it. Not worth it." The footsteps retreated quickly, almost running, and just like that, they were gone. Alara stood frozen, her knife hanging useless in her hand, staring at Cinder. The wolf turned to look at her, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, she could have sworn his eyes weren't quite wolf eyes, too knowing, too aware, too human. "What are you?" she whispered. Cinder didn't answer. Just moved back to his spot by the fire and lay down like nothing had happened. Alara didn't sleep that night. The question haunted her for days. She watched Cinder constantly now, looking for clues, for answers. The wolf moved with a precision that felt trained. Military, almost. When he brought her food, he arranged it carefully on the cleanest part of the floor. When she was sick, a fever that hit hard and fast, probably from drinking bad water, he stayed pressed against her side for 2 straight days, his body heat the only thing keeping her from shivering apart. And he listened. She had tested it sometimes, saying things just to see his reaction. "I'm thinking about checking the southern traps tomorrow," she'd say, and Cinder's head would turn toward the south wall. "I wish I had some salt," she'd mutter, and Cinder would make a frustrated sound, like he wanted to help but couldn't. It was impossible. Wolves didn't understand human speech at that level. They couldn't. But Cinder did. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into their strange coexistence, Alara was sitting by the fire trying to repair her coat, which had more holes than fabric at this point, when she finally said it out loud. "You're not actually a wolf, are you?" Cinder, who'd been dozing in a patch of weak sunlight, opened one eye. "I'm serious," Alara continued, setting down the coat. "Normal wolves don't act like you. They don't hunt for humans. They don't defend cabins from rogues. They don't understand when I'm talking to them." She paused. "They don't arrange firewood." Both eyes open now. Cinder was looking at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "So what are you?" "Because I've been going crazy trying to figure it out, and the only explanation that makes sense is also completely insane." She laughed, but it came out shaky. "Are you... is this some kind of shifter thing? Are you stuck or hiding?" Cinder stood, walked over to her, sat down directly in front of her, so close she could feel his breath on her face. And then, slowly, deliberately, he nodded. Alara's world tilted. You can understand me. You've been understanding me this whole time. Another nod. And you're not just a wolf. You're a shifter, a person. A third nod, and Cinder made a sound that was almost a whine, almost apologetic. Alara's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her knees to stop the tremor. Why? Why didn't you shift back? Why didn't you tell me? Cinder looked away, then down at his leg, the one that had been broken when she found him. You can't? You're hurt too badly. A frustrated huff. Not quite right. You're hiding from something, someone. Cinder's gaze snapped back to hers, and she saw it there, confirmation and fear. Real, genuine fear that made her chest tighten. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, you don't have to explain, but she reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and rested her hand on his head. The fur was thick and warm beneath her fingers. Thank you for staying, for keeping me alive. I don't know what you're running from, but thank you. Cinder leaned into her touch, eyes closing, and made a sound that was pure relief. They sat like that for a long time while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, and Alara tried to process the fact that she'd been sharing a cabin with a person. A shifter who'd been trapped in wolf form for who knew how long, who'd chosen to stay with her instead of leaving, who'd kept her alive when she should have died a dozen times over. We're quite a pair, she murmured. The exiled Omega and the wolf who isn't a wolf. Both of us thrown away. Both of us surviving anyway. Cinder made a sound that might have been agreement, might have been laughter. Either way, Alara wasn't alone anymore. And that changed everything. The winter showed no signs of breaking, but Alara's situation improved dramatically once she understood what Cinder was. They developed a system. Since Cinder couldn't speak, they communicated through nods, head shakes, and an increasingly complex series of gestures that probably looked insane from the outside. Alara would propose plans, where to hunt, how to reinforce the cabin, whether to risk venturing further from their shelter, and Cinder would respond. Sometimes he'd physically demonstrate what he meant, using his paws or his mouth to show her things she'd been doing wrong. He taught her to track properly, to read the forest, to understand which trees were likely to drop branches in the next storm, which paths were safer, where the predators denned. You were military, weren't you? Alara asked one day, watching Cinder efficiently scout the perimeter of their clearing in a pattern that was definitely trained behavior. Or security, something like that. Cinder paused, looked at her, and dipped his head once. Yes. Figures. Nobody moves like you do without training. She bundled her coat tighter. Was it pack military or something else? This time Cinder hesitated. Then he drew in the snow with his paw, one large circle, and several smaller circles around it. Pack alliance? Alara guessed. Multiple packs working together? A nod. That's rare. Most packs barely tolerate each other. She studied the drawing. Must have been serious, whatever you were guarding. Cinder stared at the circles for a long moment, then deliberately wiped them away with his paw. The message was clear, not talking about it. Fair enough. We've all got our secrets. But Alara filed the information away. Cinder wasn't just any shifter. He was trained, skilled, and connected to something big enough to require multi-pack cooperation, which meant someone was probably looking for him. And if they found him, found them, it wouldn't end well. She needed to be ready. The attack came on a morning so cold that water turned to ice within minutes of being melted. Alara had gone out to check the snares they'd set, she and Cinder working together now, covering more ground, when she heard the howl. Not Cinder's voice. Something else. Something wrong. She turned to run back to the cabin, and that's when she saw them. 3 wolves, large, scarred, with the rangy look of rogues who'd survived too many fights. They'd circled around behind her, cutting off her escape route. Well, well, the largest one, a brindled male with a torn ear, said, shifting mid-step into human form. He was naked despite the cold, heavily muscled, with scars crisscrossing his chest. Look what we found. A little Omega, all alone in the woods. The other 2 shifted as well. A woman with a shaved head and predatory eyes, and a younger male who looked barely out of his teens but had the same hard edge as the others. Alara backed up slowly, hand moving to the knife at her belt. I don't have anything worth taking. Maybe not, the leader said, grinning. But you're warm-blooded and we're hungry. That's worth something. The woman laughed. Relax, Omega, we'll make it quick. Probably. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. 3 against 1. No way to outrun them. No way to fight them. She was dead, and she knew it. But then Cinder burst from the tree line like vengeance given fur and teeth. He hit the younger male first, slamming into him with enough force to send both of them tumbling through the snow. There was a wet crunch, a scream cut short, and then Cinder was moving again, too fast, too precise, every movement calculated for maximum damage. The woman shifted back to wolf form and lunged. Cinder dodged, twisted, and his jaws closed on her back leg. The snap of bone was audible even from where Alara stood. The woman went down, howling. That left the leader. He was already shifting, already moving, bigger and stronger than Cinder. They collided in the center of the clearing, a tangle of teeth and claws and snarls that was too fast to follow. Alara didn't think. She pulled her knife and ran toward the downed woman, who was struggling to stand on 3 legs. The woman saw her coming, eyes widening, and tried to shift back to human form, probably to beg, or threaten, or negotiate. Alara didn't give her the chance. She'd spent 6 weeks learning to survive. 6 weeks learning that mercy was a luxury she couldn't afford. The knife went in under the ribs, angled up, the way Cinder had shown her when teaching her to dress kills. The woman made a surprised sound. Then she stopped moving. Alara pulled the knife free, turned, and saw Cinder standing over the leader's body. The brindled male wasn't getting up. His throat was gone, blood steaming in the cold air. Silence fell over the clearing. Just Alara's ragged breathing and Cinder's low growl. Are you... Alara started, then stopped. Because Cinder was hurt. She could see it now, gashes along his shoulder, a nasty bite on his foreleg, blood matting his fur. She moved toward him, but he backed away, limping. Cinder, let me... He shook his head, forcefully. Then he looked past her, toward the south, and his ears went flat. Alara turned and saw what he'd heard. More wolves, at least a dozen, moving through the trees in a coordinated pattern that screamed military or professional hunters. They were still distant, but closing fast. Friends of theirs? Alara asked. Cinder made a sound that was pure negative. Then he did something that made her stomach drop. He grabbed her sleeve in his teeth and pulled. Urgent. Run. Now. What about you? He pulled harder, nearly yanking her off her feet, then let go and positioned himself between her and the approaching wolves. The message was clear. I'll hold them off. You run. I'm not leaving you, Alara said. Forget it. Cinder snarled at her. Actually snarled, showing teeth, eyes blazing with an authority that made her wolf instinct scream, submit. But Alara Vance had spent 6 weeks surviving impossible odds. She'd faced exile, starvation, rogues, and winter. She'd saved a dying wolf who turned out to be something more, and she'd be damned if she abandoned him now. No, she said firmly. We go together or not at all. The approaching wolves were closer now. She could see them clearly, black, all of them, moving with military precision, and in the lead, the largest one, with eyes that gleamed silver even at this distance. Cinder made a desperate sound, looked at the wolves, looked at Alara, looked at the cabin. Then he made a decision. He shifted. One moment he was a wolf, and the next, in a ripple of power that made the air shimmer, he was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, naked and bleeding and absolutely covered in scars. His hair was dark, almost black, and his eyes were the same unsettling gold as his wolf form. His face was hard angles and sharp features, handsome in a way that was almost harsh. And Alara recognized him. Not personally, but she knew the face. Everyone knew the face. Kael Draven, alpha of the Ravencrest Pack, one of the most powerful alphas in the entire Northern Territories. Kael Draven, who had been declared dead 6 months ago after his convoy was ambushed. He looked at her with those gold eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse but unmistakable in its command. They're here for me, he said. If you run now, they might let you live. Alara stared at him, at the legend she'd just spent 6 weeks living with. The most powerful alpha in 3 territories, who'd been feeding her and protecting her and pretending to be a half-grown wolf pup. The black wolves were almost at the clearing. Alara Vance made her choice. She stepped forward, positioned herself beside Kael Draven, and raised her bloody knife. Then I guess we both die here, she said, Together. Kale looked at her like she was insane. Maybe she was. But she was done running. The black wolves entered the clearing, and everything went to hell. The black wolves entered the clearing, and everything went to hell. Except it didn't. They stopped. All 12 of them, moving as one unit, forming a semicircle around Alara and Kyle, but making no move to attack. Their eyes, every single pair, were fixed on Kyle with an intensity that made Alara's skin crawl. Then, in perfect synchronization, they shifted. 12 naked men and women standing in the snow, seemingly unbothered by the cold. Military bearing. Scars. The kind of faces that had seen too much and survived anyway. And in the center, the silver-eyed wolf who'd been leading them, now a man who looked like he could break Alara in half without trying. He took one step forward, dropped to one knee in the snow. "Alpha," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You're alive." The rest followed, 12 warriors kneeling in the snow, heads bowed. "We thought," the silver-eyed man's voice broke. "We've been searching for 6 months. We thought we'd lost you." Alara looked at Kyle, really looked at him for the first time since his shift. He was bleeding from at least 3 different wounds, shaking slightly, from cold or shock or both, and he looked like he wanted to be literally anywhere else. "Matthias," Kyle said quietly. His voice was rough, unused, but it carried authority like some people carried weapons. "Stand down, all of you." The silver-eyed man, Matthias, looked up. "Sir, we need to get you to safety. Medical attention. The pack." "I said stand down!" Kale's tone didn't change, but something in it made all 12 warriors flinch. "I'm not going anywhere until someone explains what the hell is happening. With respect, Alpha, you've been missing for half a year, you're injured, and you're standing in the middle of hostile territory with—" Matthias's eyes slid to Alara, and she didn't miss the way his lip curled. "With an unmarked Omega." Alara tightened her grip on her knife. The blade was still bloody from the rogue woman. Her hands were shaking, but she kept her chin up. "This unmarked Omega just saved your Alpha's life. You're welcome." Matthias's expression went cold. "You'll address me with respect, Omega, or what?" Alara cut him off, surprising herself with her own boldness. 6 weeks of survival had burned away whatever deference she'd once had. "You'll kill me? Fine. Get in line. But I'm not bowing to anyone, and I'm definitely not apologizing for keeping him alive when you apparently couldn't." The temperature in the clearing dropped about 10 degrees. Several of the warriors tensed, hands curling into fists. Kyle stepped between them. Despite being naked, injured, and outnumbered, he somehow managed to look commanding. "Matthias, explain. Now. What happened after the ambush?" Matthias stood slowly, eyes still tracking Alara like she was a threat. "The convoy was hit hard. We lost 8 warriors in the first 30 seconds. You went down, we saw you go down, and by the time we fought our way to your position, there was blood everywhere and you were gone. We searched for 3 days straight, found nothing." "Because I was already here," Kyle said, dying in the snow until she found me. All eyes turned to Alara. "You found the Alpha?" one of the female warriors asked, her tone skeptical. "You, an Omega, found Kale Draven bleeding out and just, what, decided to help?" "I found a dying wolf pup," Alara said flatly. "I didn't know who he was. I just knew he was hurt." "And you saved him." Matthias made it sound like an accusation. "I shared my food with him, yes, bandaged his wounds, kept him alive through the worst of winter. So again, you're welcome." Kale was staring at her now, something shifting in his expression. "You gave me your food when you were already starving. You were dying. I wasn't. Yet." Alara shrugged, trying to ignore the way everyone was looking at her. Seemed like the right thing to do. "Why?" The question came from Matthias, sharp and suspicious. "Why would an Omega risk her life for a wolf she didn't know?" "Because I know what it's like to be thrown away," Alara said quietly. "To be left for dead. And I wasn't going to let it happen to someone else if I could stop it." Silence fell over the clearing. Several of the warriors exchanged glances, and Alara caught what might have been respect in a few of their faces. Matthias just looked more suspicious. "We need to move," he said, turning back to Kyle. "Every hour we stay out here is another hour the traitors have to regroup." "Traitors?" Kale's voice went sharp. "Dangerous." "Who?" Matthias hesitated. We don't have proof yet. But the ambush was too clean. Someone knew your route, your timing, your security protocols, someone inside Ravencrest. Kale's hands clenched into fists. Who's running the pack now? Interim council. Your cousin Marcus is heading it up, but… Marcus. Kale's laugh was bitter. Of course it's Marcus. We don't know for sure it's him, Matthias said quickly. Could be someone else using him as cover. That's why we've been operating quietly, trying to find you before making any moves. If we'd revealed that some of us suspected betrayal without you to back us up, he shook his head. It would have been civil war. Kale was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he looked down at himself, naked, bloody, standing in the snow, and seemed to realize something. I need clothes and medical supplies, and… He swayed, just slightly, but enough that Alara moved on instinct, ducking under his arm to support his weight. He was heavy, all muscle and bone, and the contact made her very aware that he was completely naked and her face was approximately 6 inches from his bare chest. You need to shift back, she said, keeping her voice steady despite the heat creeping up her neck. You're losing too much blood in human form. Can't. Kale's voice was strained. Once I shift back, I won't be able to shift to human again for at least 12 hours. Side effect of whatever they did to me during the ambush. They drugged you, Matthias said grimly. We found traces of wolfsbane mixed with something else, something designed to keep you trapped in wolf form. How did you shift now then? One of the other warriors asked. Kale's eyes found Alara. Desperation. She was about to get herself killed defending me. Overrode the block, I guess. Romantic, Matthias said dryly. Can we go now, before we all freeze to death? But Kyle was shaking his head. Not yet. We can't just walk into Ravencrest if Marcus is the traitor. He'll kill you the moment you show your face, Matthias finished. We know. That's why we have a safe house. Neutral territory. We can regroup there, figure out who we can trust. And her? Kyle gestured at Alara. All eyes turned to her again. She really wished they'd stop doing that. She comes with us, Kale said before anyone could object. She's under my protection. Alpha, with respect, we don't know anything about her. She could be… She saved my life. Kale's tone went absolutely flat. Multiple times. She's coming. That's not a discussion. Matthias looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Kael's expression, some flash of the legendary Alpha who'd commanded multiple packs, made him back down. Fine. But if she's a spy, if this is some kind of setup… It's not, Alara said. I don't even know who you people are. 6 weeks ago I was exiled from Ironwood Pack for a crime I didn't commit. I've been surviving in that cabin ever since. That's it. That's the whole story. Ironwood? One of the female warriors perked up. You're from Ironwood? Do you know… Elena, not now. Matthias cut her off. He pulled off his coat. Where he'd been keeping it, Alara had no idea. Shifters and their dimensional storage bullshit, and tossed it to Kael. Cover up, Alpha. We move in 5 minutes. Kale caught the coat, and Alara very carefully did not watch him put it on. She definitely did not notice the way the muscles in his shoulders moved, or the scars that crisscrossed his back, or the… Stop it, she told herself firmly. He's an Alpha. You're an Omega. This is temporary. Once they get to their safe house, you'll go your separate ways, and this will all be over. The thought should have been comforting. It wasn't. The safe house turned out to be an abandoned hunting lodge about 3 miles north of Alara's cabin. 3 miles that felt like 30, trudging through snow that came up to her knees while 12 elite warriors moved around her like ghosts. They were fast, efficient, and clearly used to operating behind enemy lines. Alara felt clumsy and slow by comparison, and she was pretty sure half of them were taking turns watching her like she might bolt at any second. Kael shifted back to wolf form about a mile in, the transformation clearly painful. He kept pace with Alara after that, staying close enough that she could feel his warmth, and she was grateful for the silent company. The lodge was bigger than she'd expected. 2 stories, stone foundation, mostly intact windows. Someone had been maintaining it recently. There were fresh supplies in the kitchen, firewood stacked by the hearth, and enough bedding for the entire group. We've been using it as a staging ground, Matthias explained, directing 2 warriors to start a fire while another began inventory of their medical supplies. Trying to coordinate search patterns without drawing attention. Alara stood awkwardly in the main room, very aware that she was covered in blood. Some hers, mostly not, and probably smelled like death and unwashed omega. The warriors moved around her with practiced efficiency, setting up what looked like a command center. You, Matthias pointed at her. Second floor, last room on the right. There's a bathroom. Clean yourself up. We'll deal with you after we've dealt with the Alpha. It wasn't a request. Alara looked at Kael, who was being swarmed by medical personnel. He caught her eye and gave a tiny nod. Go. It's fine. She went. The bathroom was nicer than anywhere she'd been in months. Running water, actual hot running water from a generator-powered system. Soap. Clean towels. Alara stripped off her filthy clothes and stood under the spray for a solid 10 minutes, watching the water run brown and then pink and finally clear. She found her wounds, nothing serious, just scrapes and bruises, and cleaned them mechanically. Her reflection in the mirror was shocking. She'd lost weight, a lot of it. Her face was gaunt, her eyes too large, her hair a matted disaster. She looked like exactly what she was, someone who'd been barely surviving. Someone had left clean clothes outside the door. Soft pants, a sweater that was too big, thick socks. All of it smelled like cedar and something else. Something that made her wolf stir with interest. She pushed the feeling down and got dressed. By the time she made it back downstairs, the sun was setting and the lodge had transformed into something resembling a military operation. Maps covered one table, communication equipment another. The warriors moved with purpose, speaking in low tones. Kael was sitting by the fire, now dressed and bandaged, looking exhausted but alert. He'd shifted back to human form at some point, and someone had found him actual clothes. He looked more like the legend now, hard, dangerous, in control. He also looked directly at her the moment she entered the room. Better? He asked. Clean, at least. Alara moved closer to the fire, grateful for the warmth. Thank you. For the clothes. Thank Matthias. He's the one who keeps this place stocked. Kael gestured to the empty chair beside him. Sit. We need to talk. Alara sat. Around them, the warriors continued their work, but she could feel them listening. Tell me about Ironwood, Kael said. Everything. So she did. The whole miserable story, Garrett Stone, the false accusation, the trial, the exile. She kept her voice flat, factual, but she could feel the anger bleeding through anyway. The injustice of it. When she finished, Kael was quiet for a long moment. Garrett Stone, he finally said. Heir to the Stone fortune? That's him. And your Alpha, Torin, just let it happen? Didn't investigate? He didn't care. I'm an Omega. Garrett's family has money and influence. The math wasn't hard. Kael's expression went dark. That's not how pack justice is supposed to work. Yeah, well, that's how it worked for me. Matthias appeared from the other room holding a tablet. Alpha, we've got a problem. What now? Just got word from our contact in Ravencrest. Marcus has called a formal gathering, tomorrow night. He's planning to announce his permanent claim to leadership. The room went silent. He can't do that, one of the warriors said. Pack law requires the previous Alpha to be confirmed dead, Matthias interrupted, which, officially, Kael is. 6 months missing, no body, no confirmed sightings. Marcus has grounds. Then we stop him, another warrior said. We go in, we expose him. With what evidence? Matthias shot back. We suspect he's the traitor, but we don't have proof. And if we're wrong, if it's someone else, we show our hand and lose any advantage we have. So what do we do? The female warrior, Elena, asked. Just let him take over? Kael stood. The movement was smooth despite his injuries, and every eye in the room turned to him. We go to the gathering. That's suicide, Matthias said flatly. The moment I walk in, Marcus has to acknowledge me, Kael interrupted. Publicly. In front of witnesses from multiple packs. He can't kill me without exposing himself. He can accuse you of being an imposter, demand proof. Turn the other packs against you. Then I'll provide proof. Kael's smile was sharp, dangerous. I know things only the real Kael Draven would know. Pack secrets, alliance terms, private conversations. Let him try to dispute that. It's still risky, Elena said. What if he has allies in the other packs? What if they back his claim regardless? Then we deal with it. Kael looked around the room, making eye contact with each warrior. I'm not hiding anymore. Marcus either steps down or I make him step down. Either way, this ends tomorrow. The warriors exchanged glances. Then one by one, they nodded. We'll need a strategy, Matthias said, already moving back to the maps. Entry points, backup plans, extraction routes if it goes bad. And her? Elena gestured at Alara. What do we do with the Omega? Alara bristled. I have a name. What do we do with Alara? Elena corrected, but her tone made it clear she didn't care either way. She comes with me, Kael said. The room erupted. Absolutely not. That's insane. She'll be a liability. Enough. Kael's voice cut through the noise like a blade. She comes. She stays by my side. That's final. Matthias stepped forward. Alpha, I understand you feel you owe her, but bringing an unmarked Omega to a formal pack gathering is exactly what I'm going to do. Kael's eyes were hard. She saved my life. She kept me alive when your search parties couldn't find me, and she stood beside me today when she could have run. She's earned the right to see this through. I haven't agreed to anything, Alara pointed out. Maybe I don't want to walk into a room full of alphas and get myself killed. Kael looked at her, really looked at her, with those unsettling gold eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses. You want justice for what Ironwood did to you? This isn't about that. Isn't it? Kael moved closer, and Alara forced herself not to back up. Garrett Stone will be at the gathering. So will Alpha Tauren. So will everyone who threw you away. You can face them, make them see what their justice created. And what good will that do? They won't care. They didn't care then. Then make them care. Kael's voice dropped. Stand beside me. An Omega next to an Alpha. Equal. Let them see what that looks like. Alara's breath caught. Equal. No one had ever called her that before. This is a bad idea, she said. Probably. I could get you killed. You could, but you won't. How do you know? Kael smiled, and for the first time since his transformation, it looked genuine. Because you didn't let me die in the snow when it would have been easier. You're not going to start making easy choices now. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to say no, to walk away, to go back to her cabin and her simple existence where the biggest problem was finding dinner. But he was right. She'd never been good at easy choices. Fine, she said. I'll go. But if I die, I'm haunting you. Fair. Matthias looked like he wanted to put his fist through a wall. This is a mistake. Noted. Start planning. Kael turned back to Alara. You'll need different clothes, something formal. Can't show up looking like an exile who's been living in the woods for 2 months, Alara supplied. Yeah, I'm aware. Elena, take her to the supply room. Find something that fits. Elena looked mutinous but nodded. Come on, Omega. Let's get you dressed up like a doll. Alara followed her upstairs, very aware of the tension radiating off the other woman. The supply room was packed with clothes, weapons, and equipment. Elena rifled through a rack of formal wear with more aggression than strictly necessary. Here, she threw a dress at Alara. Try that. Alara caught it. The fabric was soft, expensive, dark blue. This is too nice. It'll have to do. We don't exactly stock Omega formal wear. The hostility in Elena's voice was impossible to miss. Alara set the dress down. What's your problem with me? Besides the fact that you showed up out of nowhere, and now the Alpha is making decisions based on protecting you instead of pack safety. I didn't ask for any of this. Didn't you? Elena turned, eyes sharp. You saved him. You kept him alive. You made him dependent on you. And now he feels like he owes you. That's convenient. I saved him because it was the right thing to do. That's it. Sure. And it's just coincidence that you're from Ironwood, where some of our biggest political rivals operate. Just coincidence that you happen to be in exactly the right place to find our missing Alpha. Alara's hands clenched into fists. You think I'm a spy? I think you're a very convenient coincidence, and I don't believe in coincidences. Then believe this. I have no idea who you people are. I don't care about your politics, and the only reason I'm here is because your Alpha insisted. The second this is over, I'm gone. Elena studied her for a long moment. Then she pulled out another dress. This one's simpler, dark green. Try this one. The blue washes you out. It wasn't exactly a peace offering, but it wasn't hostility either. Alara took it. He sat down. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation. The warriors transformed the lodge into a command center, running drills and contingency plans. Alara stayed out of the way, watching from the corners, trying to process the fact that she was actually going through with this. Kyle spent most of the time in meetings, but he sought her out periodically, checking in, making sure she was okay. It was strange having someone care about her well-being after so long alone. Night fell, then dawn, then afternoon, and then it was time. The gathering was being held at Ravencrest territory, neutral ground technically, since multiple packs would be attending. Matthias had arranged for a small convoy of vehicles to get them there, and the plan was simple: walk in, make the challenge, survive long enough to expose Marcus. Simple, not easy. Alara dressed in the green gown Elena had given her, and she barely recognized herself in the mirror. Clean, fed, wearing clothes that actually fit. She looked almost normal, almost like she belonged. She definitely didn't feel like it. Kyle appeared in her doorway as she was trying to figure out what to do with her hair. He'd cleaned up too, dressed in formal black that made him look every inch the alpha he was supposed to be. "You look nervous," he said. "I'm terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He stepped into the room, and Alara was suddenly very aware of how small the space was. "I meant what I said. You stay beside me. You don't back down. You show them you're not afraid. Even though I am. Especially because you are." Kael's expression softened slightly. "You've survived 2 months alone in winter. You've fought rogues. You've kept me alive. You can survive one night with a bunch of pompous alphas. Those pompous alphas want me dead. Some of them, maybe. Others will be curious. Smart money says half the room will be trying to figure out who you are and what you mean to me. And what do I mean to you?" The question hung in the air between them. Kael was quiet for a moment, and Alara could see him choosing his words carefully. "You're the Omega who refused to let me die," he finally said. "The one who gave me her last food when she was starving. Who stood beside me when trained warriors wanted to kill us both. That means something. But what? I don't know yet." Kael's smile was slight, honest. "But I'd like to find out, after we survive tonight." Before Alara could respond, Matthias appeared. "Convoy's ready. We need to move." The ride to Ravencrest was tense and silent. Alara sat beside Kael in the back of the SUV, watching the forest blur past, and tried to calm her racing heart. This was insane. She was walking into a gathering of the most powerful wolves in the territory, wearing a borrowed dress and standing beside an alpha everyone thought was dead. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. They arrived at Ravencrest Hall, a massive stone building that looked more like a fortress than a gathering place, just as the sun was setting. Other vehicles were already there, dozens of them, and wolves in formal attire were streaming through the main entrance. "Remember the plan," Matthias said, checking his concealed weapons one last time. "We go in quiet. No announcements. We wait until Marcus makes his claim, then we reveal you. Maximum impact." "And if it goes bad?" Elena asked. "Then we fight our way out and regroup." Comforting. They exited the vehicles and moved toward the entrance. Alara stuck close to Kael, very aware of the stares they were attracting. An unknown Omega beside a man who looked remarkably like the supposedly dead Alpha. People were noticing. The main hall was enormous, filled with wolves from at least a dozen different packs. The air was thick with competing scents and barely restrained dominance displays. Alara's Omega instinct screamed at her to submit, to lower her eyes, to make herself small. She kept her chin up and her spine straight. A gong sounded, and the crowd quieted. At the front of the room, on a raised platform, stood Marcus Draven. He looked like Kael. Same dark hair, same sharp features. But where Kael's presence was earned authority, Marcus's was performed arrogance. He smiled at the crowd like he'd already won. "Friends, allies, honored guests," Marcus began, his voice carrying across the hall. "Thank you for attending on such short notice. As you know, 6 months ago, we lost Alpha Kael Draven to a cowardly ambush. We searched, we hoped, but it's time to accept the truth. He's gone." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Pack law is clear. Marcus continued. In the absence of an alpha for more than 6 months, leadership passes to the next in line. Tonight, I formally claim the position of alpha of Ravencrest Pack. No, Kyle said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmurs like a knife. Every head turned. Kyle stepped forward, Alara at his side, and the crowd parted like water. Marcus's face went white, then red. Then something that might have been fear flickered across his features before being replaced by anger. That's not possible, Marcus said. You're dead. Clearly not. Kale climbed the steps to the platform, Ilara following. Behind them, Matthias and the other warriors had fanned out, watching the crowd for threats. I'm alive. I'm here. And I'm reclaiming my pack. The hall erupted into chaos. Alphas shouted over each other. Warriors moved toward the platform. Marcus held up a hand, calling for silence, and eventually got it. Marcus's smile was strained. This is wonderful news, my cousin, alive, but we'll need proof. Anyone could claim to be Kyle Draven. Anyone could. Your first kill was a deer in the Northwest Woods when you were 14, Kyle interrupted. You cried after. Didn't eat meat for a week. I was the only one you told. Marcus's jaw tightened. Your mother's dying words were, protect the pack, both of you. You asked me if I thought she knew about your preference for males over females. That's enough. You have a scar on your left hip from the time we crashed a motorcycle trying to impress the Silvermane twins. We told everyone it was from a rogue attack. The crowd was silent now, watching. Marcus looked around, seeing his support crumbling, and made a choice. Fine, he said. You're KL. You're alive. And you've been gone for 6 months while the pack needed leadership. Where were you? Recovering from the ambush you planned. Gasps, shouts. Marcus's face twisted. That's a lie. Is it? Kale's voice went cold. You're the only one who knew my route, my schedule, my security protocols. The ambush was too clean, too organized. Someone with inside knowledge set it up. Prove it, Marcus snarled. You have no evidence. I have testimony from the warriors who survived. I have communications you thought were deleted. And I have you standing here trying to claim a position that was never yours. Marcus lunged. It was fast, vicious, a full alpha attack meant to kill. But Kyle was faster. He caught Marcus's arm, twisted, and suddenly Marcus was on the ground, Kale's hand around his throat. You tried to have me killed, Kale said quietly. You betrayed your pack, your family, everything we built. You were weak, Marcus gasped out. Too soft, too worried about alliances and politics. The pack needed strength. The pack needed loyalty, which you don't have. Kale squeezed, and Marcus's eyes went wide. Kyle, don't. That was Alara, her voice cutting through the violence. Not like this. Make him face justice. Proper justice. Kale looked at her, then at Marcus, then at the crowd of witnesses watching in absolute silence. He let go. Marcus collapsed, coughing, and 2 of Matthias's warriors moved in to restrain him. Marcus Draven, Kyle announced to the room, you are charged with treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and betrayal of pack trust. You will be held for trial. If any pack here wishes to speak in his defense, do so now. Silence. No one moved. Kyle turned to face the crowd. I am Kyle Draven, Alpha of Ravencrest. I have returned, and this pack, our alliance, will be stronger than ever. The room erupted in cheers, and Alara, standing beside him, felt the weight of 100 stares. Saw Garrett Stone in the crowd, his face pale with shock. Saw Alpha Torin, looking uncomfortable. Saw Sienna, her mouth hanging open. She met each of their gazes and didn't look away. The girl they'd thrown away had just helped bring down a traitor. And she was just getting started. The girl they'd thrown away had just helped bring down a traitor. And she was just getting started. The cheers still echoed through Ravencrest Hall when Garrett Stone pushed through the crowd. Alara saw him coming, everyone did, and the room went quiet with the kind of anticipation that precedes violence. This is absurd, Garrett announced, his voice carrying the entitled confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. He pointed at Alara like she was something stuck to his shoe. That Omega is a convicted thief. She was exiled from Ironwood for stealing pack funds, and now she's standing beside Alpha Draven like she has any right to be here? Kyle went very still beside her. Careful, Stone, very careful. I'm simply stating facts. Garrett's smile was practiced, charming, designed to win crowds. It had probably worked for him his entire life. Alara Vance was tried and found guilty. Her presence here is an insult to pack law, and the trial was a fraud, Alara said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. She clasped them behind her back so no one would see. You know it, I know it, and now everyone else is going to know it too. Garrett's expression flickered. Just for a second, but she saw it. Panic, quickly masked. You were caught. I was framed. By you, because I said no when you tried to claim me. The murmurs started again, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Alara saw Alpha Tauren in the back, his face carefully neutral. Saw Sienna beside Garrett, her perfect features twisted with something that might have been fear. That's a serious accusation, one of the other alphas said. A woman Alara didn't recognize, older, with silver streaking her dark hair. Do you have proof? I have the truth, Alara said, which is more than Ironwood gave me. The truth according to an Omega who, Garrett started, but Kyle cut him off. The truth according to someone who saved my life, who survived 2 months in the frontier alone, who stood beside me when trained warriors wanted us both dead. Kale's voice was dangerously quiet. I'd choose her word over yours any day, Stone. Garrett's jaw clenched. This is pack business, Ironwood business. It has everything to do with justice, Kyle interrupted, which seems to be something Ironwood has forgotten. He looked past Garrett to where Alpha Tauren stood. You exiled her based on what? The word of a single witness? No investigation? No evidence beyond hearsay? Tauren stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with being called out in front of the entire gathering. The witness was credible. The Stone family has served Ironwood for generations. Ishki thinks. What? So money bought credibility, Kyle said flatly. Good to know what Ironwood values. Now wait just a minute. I'm not finished. Kale's tone could have frozen fire. Alara Vance saved my life. Multiple times. She shared her last food with me when she was starving. She fought rogues to protect me. She made decisions that kept us both alive when your so-called justice had already condemned her to death. He paused, letting that sink in. And you want to tell me she's a thief? That she's unworthy? I don't think so. The room was dead silent. Garrett opened his mouth, probably to argue, but Sienna grabbed his arm. Alara caught the look that passed between them, a whole conversation in a glance. Sienna looked terrified. Garrett looked cornered. The witness, Alara said suddenly, pieces clicking into place. The one who testified against me. Where is she? Tauren frowned. What does that have to do with... Where is she? She should be here, shouldn't she, representing Ironwood? Alara looked around the room. I don't see her. Why isn't she here? Silence. Then a voice from the crowd. Because she left the pack 3 weeks ago. Everyone turned. A young man Alara vaguely recognized from the kitchens, Daniel, maybe, stepped forward. He looked nervous but determined. Sarah Winters, the witness. She left Ironwood, took a settlement from the Stone family and relocated to the coast. She had family reasons, Garrett stammered. She was paid off, Daniel said. Everyone knows it. We just didn't say anything because... He looked at Alara. Because no one cared about an Omega. The words hit like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. Tauren's face had gone red. These are unsubstantiated claims. Are they? The silver-haired alpha stepped forward, and Alara saw the markings on her formal wear. She was from Silvermane Pack, one of the oldest bloodlines in the territory. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like Ironwood convicted an Omega based on false testimony bought by a wealthy family. That's not justice. That's corruption. Other alphas started weighing in. Some defending Tauren, some questioning the trial, all of them talking over each other. The gathering was devolving into chaos, and Alara stood in the center of it, feeling like she might throw up. Kyle's hand found her shoulder, steady, grounding. Enough, he said, and somehow his voice cut through the noise. Here's what's going to happen. Ironwood Pack will conduct a formal review of Alara Vance's trial, a real investigation, with neutral oversight. If she's found innocent, which she will be, her exile is nullified and she's owed restitution. You have no authority over Ironwood, Torrin protested. No, but I have authority over Ravencrest, and we have mutual defense agreements with 6 packs in this room. I'm sure they'd be very interested to know that Ironwood's idea of justice is to exile innocent Omegas based on bought testimony. Kale's smile was sharp enough to cut. Cooperate, or find out what it's like to stand alone when winter comes. It was a threat wrapped in politics, wrapped in a promise, and judging by Torrin's expression, he knew he'd lost. Fine, Torrin said through gritted teeth. We'll review the case. Good. Alara will be present for the entire process, as will I. Kale looked at Garrett. And Stone? If I find out you had anything to do with the original frame-up, you'll wish the frontier had killed you. Garrett went pale but said nothing. The gathering continued, but the energy had shifted. Alara found herself swept up in a tide of introductions and questions. Alphas, who'd ignored her existence 5 minutes ago, were now treating her like someone worth knowing. It was disorienting and exhausting, and more than a little infuriating. She escaped to a balcony as soon as she could manage it. The night air was cold and sharp, a relief after the stuffy heat of the hall. Alara leaned against the stone railing and tried to process everything that had just happened. She'd faced down Garrett Stone, called out Ironwood in front of the most powerful wolves in the territory, and somehow survived. You did well in there. Alara turned to find the silver-haired alpha from earlier. Up close, she was striking, tall, with the kind of presence that suggested she'd been in charge for a very long time. I didn't do anything, Alara said. Kael did all the talking. You stood beside him. That's not nothing. The woman moved to stand beside her at the railing. I'm Diana Silvermane. My pack has territory to the east. Alara Vance, but you probably knew that. I did. Diana smiled. I also know what it's like to be underestimated because of designation. I was born an Omega, you know. Became Alpha through challenge when the previous leadership proved incompetent. Alara stared. That's almost impossible. Almost, but not quite. Diana's expression was knowing. You saved Kael Draven's life. You survived exile. You just faced down your abusers in front of a room full of witnesses. What do you think is impossible anymore? Everything. All of it. Diana laughed. Fair enough. But here's what I came to tell you. What happened in there tonight? That's going to ripple. Packs are going to start asking questions about how they treat their Omegas, about whether justice actually means justice, or just whatever benefits the powerful. I didn't mean to start anything. I just wanted... You wanted to survive. I know. But survival has consequences. Diana turned to face her fully. Kael Draven is going to need allies, people he can trust, and you've proven yourself trustworthy. So here's my offer. If you need sanctuary, if Ironwood makes trouble, if anything goes wrong, Silvermane territory is open to you. Alara's throat tightened. Why would you do that? Because 30 years ago, I was you, an Omega everyone had written off, and someone gave me a chance. Diana squeezed her shoulder. Pay it forward when you can. She left, and Alara was alone again with the night and her thoughts. The door opened behind her. She knew without turning that it was Kael. You okay? He asked. I don't know. Ask me in a week. Alara turned to face him. Thank you for what you did in there. You didn't have to... Yes, I did. Kael moved closer, and Alara's breath caught. This close, she could see the scars on his face, the exhaustion in his eyes. You saved my life, Alara. Multiple times. What I did in there is the bare minimum. It's more than anyone else has ever done for me. Then everyone else is an idiot. Kael's smile was slight. You're brilliant, strong. You survived things that would have killed most wolves. You deserve better than what Ironwood gave you. I don't need compliments. I need... Alara stopped because she didn't actually know what she needed. Safety, justice, a place to belong, all of it, none of it, something she couldn't name. What do you need? Kael asked gently. I need to not be looking over my shoulder all the time. I need to know that when I go to sleep, I'll wake up in the same place. I need... She laughed, but it came out broken. I need to stop being so damn tired. Then stay. With Ravencrest. With me. Alara's heart stuttered. What? Stay. I can offer you protection, resources, a place in the pack if you want it, or just sanctuary if you don't. Kale's expression was earnest. You don't have to decide now, but the offer stands. Why? Because you feel guilty? Because I don't want to lose you. The words hung in the air between them. Alara searched his face for dishonesty, for manipulation, for any of the things she'd learned to watch for. Found nothing but honest want. I'll think about it, she managed. That's all I'm asking. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Matthias appeared in the doorway looking agitated. Alpha, we have a problem. Of course we do, Kale muttered. What now? 3 more conspirators just confessed, including someone from your personal guard. Kale's expression went dark. Who? Thomas Reeves. Says Marcus promised him a position of power in the new regime. He's the one who gave Marcus your route information. Thomas! Kale's hands clenched. I trained him myself, trusted him. I know, I'm sorry. Kale took a breath, visibly steadying himself. Bring them all to the holding cells. We'll deal with this properly. He looked at Alara. I have to... Go, I'll be fine. But Kyle hesitated. Elena will stay with you. Make sure you're safe. I don't need a babysitter. Humor me. Kael's smile was tired. At least until we know who else might have been working with Marcus. He left with Matthias, and minutes later Elena appeared looking annoyed. Apparently I'm your shadow now, she said. Apparently. They stood in awkward silence. Then Elena sighed. Look, I was wrong. About you being a spy. You're clearly not working with Marcus. Clearly. And what you did in there, calling out Garrett Stone, that took guts. Or stupidity. Sometimes those are the same thing. Elena leaned against the wall. For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. Kael. He's been different since he came back. More grounded. I think that's you. Alara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The night wore on. The gathering slowly dispersed, alphas and their entourages heading back to their territories. Alara watched from the balcony as vehicles pulled away, headlights cutting through the dark. Garrett Stone left early, practically dragging Sienna with him. Alpha Tauren followed soon after, looking like he'd aged 10 years. The other Ironwood wolves avoided looking at Alara as they passed. Good. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them think about what they'd done. By midnight, only Ravencrest wolves remained. Kael returned looking exhausted but satisfied. It's done, he said. Thomas and the others are secured. We'll have formal trials within the week. How many total? Alara asked. 5 conspirators. All of them confessed once they realized Marcus was going down. Kael rubbed his face. I need to review our entire security structure. If 5 people could be bought, how many others might be compromised? That's a tomorrow problem, Elena said firmly. Tonight, you need sleep. I need sleep. Alpha's orders. Elena's smile was slight. Oh wait, you're the Alpha. Sleep anyway. Kael laughed despite himself. Fine. Alara, there's a guest room prepared for you. 2nd floor, 3rd door on the left. I can go back to the lodge. No, it's not secure yet. You stay here until we've cleared the entire pack of potential threats. Alara wanted to argue but found she didn't have the energy. Okay. The guest room was nicer than anywhere she'd ever stayed. Soft bed, clean sheets, a bathroom with actual hot water. Alara showered, washing away the stress of the night, and collapsed into bed wearing borrowed sleepwear. She expected to lie awake, mind racing. Instead, she fell asleep within minutes and woke to screaming. Alara bolted upright, heart hammering. The screaming continued, coming from downstairs, multiple voices, chaos and panic. She grabbed the knife she'd insisted on keeping by the bed and ran into the hallway. Elena was already there, half-dressed, weapons in hand. Stay behind me. They rushed downstairs to find Ravencrest Hall in chaos. Warriors were running in all directions, and there was smoke, actual smoke, coming from the east wing. Kael appeared barking orders. Evacuate the civilians. Get water teams on that fire. Secure the perimeter. This might be a diversion. What happened? Alara asked. Someone set a fire. Deliberately. Kael's expression was grim. And they took advantage of the chaos to break Marcus out of his cell. He's gone? Gone. along with at least 2 guards who were supposed to be loyal. Kale's jaw clenched. This isn't over. He's going to regroup and come back. Then we make sure we're ready, Matthias said, appearing with a full tactical team. I've already contacted our allies. They're sending reinforcements. The next few hours were a blur. The fire was contained, minor damage, mostly smoke, but Marcus and his accomplices were in the wind, and the pack was on high alert. Alara found herself in a war room with Kael, Matthias, and the senior leadership, watching as they coordinated search parties and defensive positions. He'll go to ground, one of the warriors said. Wait until we think he's given up, then strike. Or he'll strike immediately, another argued, while we're still disorganized. He needs resources, Alara said. Everyone turned to look at her. She swallowed hard but continued. Marcus can't fight you alone. He needs allies, money, support. Where would he get that? Kale's eyes narrowed. The Stone family. Garrett's father has connections to half the packs in the territory. If Marcus offered him something valuable in exchange for support, like Ironwood territory, Matthias suggested. If Marcus takes control of Ravencrest and destabilizes Ironwood, the Stones could move in. It's a reach, Elena said, but it fits. Kale stood. Get me everything we have on the Stone family's recent financial movements, communications, anything that might show contact with Marcus or his supporters. The warriors scattered to follow orders, leaving Alara alone with Kael. You're good at this, he said. Strategy, seeing connections. I'm good at surviving. This is just another version of that. It's more than that. Kael moved closer. You see things other people miss, patterns, motivations. It's a gift. It's paranoia from years of being the lowest person in the pack hierarchy. Maybe, but it's useful. Kael's expression was serious. I meant what I said before. I want you to stay. Not just for protection. I want you to be part of this, part of rebuilding Ravencrest into something better. I don't know anything about running a pack. You know about justice, about what it's like when the system fails. That's exactly what we need. Kael paused. And honestly, I trust you, more than I trust most of the people who've been in this pack for years. Alara's throat tightened. That's a lot of pressure. You've survived worse. Before she could respond, Matthias burst back in. We found something. Financial records showing large payments from Stone family accounts to an offshore entity. Dates match up with the ambush and several other suspicious incidents. That's it, Kael said. That's our proof. Get it to the Pack Council, all of them. Let them see what the Stones have been doing. Within hours, the evidence was spreading. By dawn, 3 more packs had reached out to offer support to Ravencrest and cut ties with Ironwood. The political landscape was shifting, fast. And through it all, Alara stood beside Kael, offering insights, asking questions, helping coordinate responses. She didn't realize how natural it felt until Elena commented on it. You're good at this, the warrior said, watching Alara help organize supply lines. The leadership thing. I'm just doing what needs doing. That's what leadership is. Elena's smile was genuine this time. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. I think we need you. By the 3rd day after the gathering, Marcus still hadn't been found, but his network was crumbling. 2 more conspirators turned themselves in. 3 packs formally withdrew their support for Ironwood. The Stone family went silent, refusing to answer communications. And Alara Vance, exiled Omega, convicted thief, girl thrown away to die, found herself sitting in on council meetings as Kael's advisor. It was surreal, impossible, and somehow exactly right. The review of her trial came back on the 4th day. The investigating team, neutral wolves from 3 different packs, found overwhelming evidence of fraud. Sarah Winters had been paid off. Garrett Stone had fabricated the entire scenario. The original witness testimony was full of inconsistencies that no one had bothered to check. Alara was officially declared innocent. Alpha Tauren sent a formal apology and an offer of restitution, money, territory rights, whatever she wanted to make up for the injustice. Alara sent back a counteroffer. She wanted him to implement oversight on all future trials. Neutral investigators for any case involving Omegas. Transparent procedures. Actual justice. And she wanted Garrett Stone exiled. Tauren agreed to all of it. The news spread fast. Within a week, 4 other packs had adopted similar policies. Within 2 weeks, there was talk of a territory-wide summit on Omega rights. Alara had started a revolution without meaning to, and she wasn't done yet. On the 10th day after the gathering, Kyle found her in the library, surrounded by books on pack law and governance. "You're going to change everything, you know," he said. "I'm just trying to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. That's how change starts." Kyle sat down beside her. "I have something for you." He handed her a formal document. Alara scanned it, and her breath caught. It was an official appointment, advisor to the Alpha on matters of justice and Omega welfare, with full authority to implement reforms and investigate complaints. "This is long overdue," Kyle said. "You've earned it multiple times over." Alara looked at the document, at her name written in formal script, and something in her chest cracked open. This was real. This was happening. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building something new. "I accept," she said. Kale's smile was bright and genuine. "Good, because we have a lot of work to do." And for the first time since her exile, Alara Vance allowed herself to hope. The girl they'd thrown away had not only survived, she'd won. But Marcus Draven wasn't finished, and Alara knew it the moment the first report came in. 3 days after her official appointment, Matthias burst into the council room with a tablet and a grim expression. Alara was in the middle of reviewing proposed reforms with 2 other advisors when he interrupted. "We found him," Matthias said. "Marcus. He's holed up in the old mining settlement near the border, and he's not alone." Kale stood immediately. "How many?" "At least 40. Mix of rogues and wolves from packs that still support him. They're fortified and armed." Matthias pulled up surveillance images. "And they've taken hostages. 3 families from the settlements nearby, including children." The room went cold. Alara moved to look at the images. The mining settlement was a relic from 50 years ago, half-collapsed buildings and rusted equipment spread across a valley. Easy to defend, hard to assault. Marcus had chosen well. "He's trying to force a negotiation," one of the advisors said. "Release him and his conspirators, or the hostages die." "We don't negotiate with traitors," Kale said flatly. "We also don't let children die," Alara countered. Everyone looked at her. "What?" "I'm right. We need a third option." "What do you suggest?" Kyle asked. Alara studied the images, her mind racing through possibilities. The settlement was built into a hillside, with only 2 main access points. Marcus would have guards on both. A direct assault would get people killed, including the hostages. But there was something else, something the images showed that maybe Marcus hadn't considered. "The old mine shafts," she said, pointing. "These tunnels run under the entire settlement. If some of them are still accessible, we could come up from below." Matthias leaned closer. "That's actually not bad. But we'd need to know which shafts are still open, and where they lead." "I know someone who might," one of the other advisors said. "Old Klaus. He worked those mines before they closed. If anyone knows the tunnel system, it's him." "Get him here," KL ordered. "Now." Within an hour they had Klaus, a grizzled old wolf with more scars than hair, sitting with them, drawing tunnel layouts from memory. "Most of them collapsed," he said, his voice rough from decades of smoking. "But there's 3 that might still be passable. This one here," he pointed to a spot on the map, "comes up right under what used to be the foreman's office. Big building, center of the settlement." "That's where Marcus would set up command," Matthias said. "It's the most defensible position, so we use it against him." Alara looked at Kyle. "Small team goes through the tunnel, creates a distraction from inside. Meanwhile, your main force hits from the outside. Split his attention." "That's risky," Elena said. "The team going through the tunnel would be trapped if things go wrong." "Everything about this is risky," Alara met her eyes. "But it's better than a frontal assault." Kale was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he nodded. "We do it." "Matthias, I want your best infiltration team. Elena, coordinate with the main assault force. We move at dawn." "I'm going with the tunnel team," Alara said. "Absolutely not." "I know you're about to say it's too dangerous," Alara interrupted. "But I'm going anyway. Those hostages need to see a friendly face when we get them out. Someone who isn't going to terrify them. That's me." "She's right," Elena said reluctantly. Civilian extraction works better with non-combat personnel. Kael looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew they were right. Fine, but you stay behind the combat team at all times. No heroics. I'll do my best, Alara said, which wasn't exactly a promise. The next 12 hours were a blur of preparation. Alara found herself outfitted with tactical gear, given a crash course in hand signals, and briefed on extraction protocols. The team going into the tunnel was 7 strong, 5 warriors, Klaus to guide them, and Alara. Elena pulled her aside before they left. Here, she handed Alara a small pistol. I know you prefer knives, but in close quarters this is faster. Safety's here. Don't shoot unless you absolutely have to. Alara took it, surprised by the weight. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, just don't get killed. Elena's expression was serious. Kael would never forgive himself. And honestly, I'd miss having someone around who calls him on his bullshit. They left Ravencrest Hall under cover of darkness, traveling in blacked-out vehicles to a staging point 2 miles from the mining settlement. The tunnel entrance was hidden in a collapsed hillside, barely visible even with night vision. Klaus went first, squeezing through a gap that looked too small for anything larger than a rabbit. The warriors followed, then Alara, bringing up the rear. The tunnel was worse than she'd imagined. Narrow, unstable, with water dripping from the ceiling and the constant threat of collapse. They moved in single file, lights off except for the lead warrior's dim headlamp, communicating only through hand signals. It took 2 hours to reach the settlement. 2 hours of crawling through darkness, trying not to think about the tons of earth above them, the air getting thinner the deeper they went. When they finally reached the access point Klaus had described, Alara was shaking with exhaustion and suppressed panic. This is it, Klaus whispered. Should come up in the basement of the foreman's office. Might be blocked. Might be guarded. Might be... We get it, one of the warriors said. It's risky. Everything's risky. They stacked up at the access point, a rusty ladder leading to a trap door. The lead warrior climbed slowly, listened for several minutes, then carefully pushed the trap door open. Silence. He climbed through, weapon ready, then signaled all clear. The team moved up one by one. Alara came last, and when she emerged into the basement, she had to suppress a gasp. The space was full of supplies, weapons, ammunition, food, medical gear, enough to sustain a small army for weeks. Marcus had been planning this for a long time. Hostages should be upstairs, the lead warrior whispered, checking his tactical display. 2 floors up, northwest corner. That's where the heat signatures are concentrated. They moved through the building like ghosts, clearing rooms, avoiding the few guards Marcus had posted. The warriors were good, professional, efficient, lethal when necessary. Alara stayed in the middle of the formation, trying to be as small and quiet as possible. They reached the room holding the hostages without raising an alarm, but when the lead warrior opened the door, Alara's heart sank. There were more than 3 families, at least 20 people, most of them women and children, huddled together in the corner. They were terrified, dirty, and when they saw armed wolves entering the room, several of the children started crying. It's okay, Alara said quickly, stepping forward. We're here to help. I'm Alara. I'm with Ravencrest Pack. We're getting you out. A woman in her 40s stood up, shielding several children behind her. How do we know you're not with them? Because if we were, we'd have just shot you, one of the warriors said bluntly. Not helping, Alara hissed at him. She turned back to the woman. Please. We don't have much time. The main assault starts in 10 minutes, and this building is going to be a war zone. We need to move now. The woman studied her face, searching for deception. Then she nodded. Okay. Everyone, stay quiet. Do exactly what they say. Getting 20 civilians through a combat zone was harder than Alara had anticipated. The children were frightened. Several of the adults were injured, and every sound seemed magnified in the tense silence. They made it down 1 floor before the alarm went up. Someone spotted them, a guard doing rounds, and suddenly the entire building erupted with shouts and gunfire. Move! The lead warrior barked, returning fire. Get them to the basement! Alara grabbed the nearest child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 6, and ran. Behind her, the warriors laid down covering fire, holding off Marcus's forces while the civilians escaped. They made it to the basement, made it to the tunnel entrance, started pushing people through. That's when Alara realized someone was missing. The The woman who'd spoken first, she was still upstairs, going back for someone. "Wait here," Alara told Klaus. "Get them out." "Where are you?" But Alara was already running back up the stairs. She found the woman in one of the side rooms, trying to lift an unconscious elderly man, her father, probably, or uncle. "I can't leave him," the woman was saying, tears streaming down her face. "I can't." "You're not," Alara said. She grabbed the man's other arm, and together they managed to get him moving. He was heavy, semi-conscious, and the journey back down was excruciating. They were halfway to the basement when Marcus appeared. He looked worse than when Alara had last seen him, gaunt, wild-eyed, with the desperate energy of someone who knew they'd already lost. He had a gun, and it was pointed directly at Alara. "You," he said, and his laugh was unhinged. "Of course it's you, the Omega who ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything. You did that yourself." "Shut up." Marcus's hand was shaking. "You think you're special? Think because my cousin likes you, you matter? You're nothing, an exile, a thief." "I was never a thief." "But you're definitely a traitor." Marcus's face twisted. "I would have made Ravencrest great, stronger. But Kyle was weak, too worried about alliances and politics and actually caring about people?" Alara cut him off. "Yeah, what a terrible quality in a leader." "I said shut up!" The gun fired. Alara felt the impact before she heard it, a burning pain in her left shoulder that knocked her sideways. She hit the floor hard, vision blurring. The woman screamed, and then there were footsteps, running, shouting, and suddenly Kyle was there, in full alpha form, more terrifying than Alara had ever seen him. What happened next was fast and brutal. Kyle took Marcus down in seconds, disarmed him, and had him pinned before Marcus could even think about reaching for another weapon. "You shot her!" Kyle snarled, and his voice was barely human. "You shot Kyle." Alara's voice was weak, but it stopped him. "I'm okay. Get the hostages out first." Kyle looked torn between murder and duty. Duty won, barely. He handed Marcus off to Matthias's team, who'd arrived with the main assault force, and came to Alara. His hands were gentle despite their size, checking her wound with practiced efficiency. "Through and through," he said. "You're lucky. Missed the bone." "Doesn't feel lucky," Alara managed. "Can you walk?" "I can try." Kale helped her up, supporting most of her weight, and they made it to the basement. The hostages were gone, evacuated through the tunnel, and the building was being secured by Ravencrest forces. It was over. Marcus was in custody. His supporters were either captured or fled. The hostages were safe. They'd won. Alara passed out somewhere between the settlement and the medical tent, and when she woke up, she was in a clean bed at Ravencrest Hall, with her shoulder bandaged and Kyle asleep in a chair beside her. He jerked awake the moment she moved. "You're up. How do you feel?" "Like I got shot." "You did get shot. Because you went back for someone. After I specifically told you no heroics. I said I'd do my best. I never promised." Alara tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "Ow!" "Stop moving." Kale helped adjust her pillows. "The doctor said you need rest. The bullet didn't hit anything vital, but you lost blood." "The hostages?" "Safe. All of them. Thanks to you and the team." "And Marcus?" "In a secure facility, he'll face trial within the month." Kale's expression went hard. "For treason, conspiracy to commit murder, hostage-taking, and attempted murder of a pack advisor. He's done." Alara let that sink in. It was really over. The threat was neutralized. She was safe. "You scared me," Kyle said quietly. "When I heard you'd been shot, I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're injured because you risked your life for people you didn't even know. Someone had to. Why does it always have to be you?" Alara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw genuine fear in his eyes. Fear for her. "Because I know what it's like to be abandoned," she said softly. "To think no one's coming to help. I couldn't let those people feel that way." Kale's jaw worked. Then he reached out and took her hand, carefully avoiding her injured side. "You're incredible and terrifying, and I'm very glad you're alive." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Kale cleared his throat. "The council wants to give you a commendation for your actions during the rescue. Diana Silvermane has proposed you for a territory-wide award for Omega advocacy, and—" he paused. "3 PACs have formally requested you as a consultant for their justice reform initiatives." Alara's head spun. "That's a lot." "You've earned it. All of it. I just wanted to survive." "You did more than survive. You changed things." Kale squeezed her hand gently. "The question is, what do you want to do now?" What did she want? A month ago, the answer would have been simple: safety, food, warmth, the basic necessities of survival. Now she wanted more. "I want to keep going," Alara said. "The reforms, the advocacy work, making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. Even if it means staying in the public eye, dealing with politics and bureaucracy and people who will resist change. Especially then, someone has to push back." Kale's smile was proud. "Then Ravencrest and I will support you, whatever you need." Over the next 2 weeks, Alara recovered and the territory transformed. Marcus's trial was public, broadcast to all the PACs. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. He was stripped of his name, his PAC ties, and exiled to the furthest edge of the frontier with nothing but the clothes on his back. Poetic justice, Alara thought, watching the broadcast from her recovery bed. The Stone family didn't fare much better. Garrett Stone was exiled from Ironwood after the full extent of his fraud was revealed. His father was removed from the PAC Council. The family fortune was seized to pay restitution to Alara and the other victims of their schemes. Sienna Hart disappeared. No one knew where she'd gone, and no one particularly cared. Alpha Torrin stepped down from Ironwood leadership, replaced by a younger Alpha who immediately implemented the reforms Alara had demanded. The new leadership reached out to Ravencrest, proposing alliance and cooperation. Kael accepted, with conditions. And through it all, Alara worked. She met with Omega advocates from across the territory, helped draft new justice protocols, consulted on cases where Omegas had been mistreated. She was busy, exhausted, and happier than she'd been in her entire life. 3 weeks after the rescue, Diana Silvermane hosted a formal summit on Omega rights. Representatives from 20 PACs attended, and Alara was the keynote speaker. She stood on a stage in front of hundreds of wolves, alphas, betas, omegas, and told her story. All of it. The exile, the survival, the fight to prove her innocence. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the entire room was on its feet, applauding. Alara looked out over the crowd and saw faces she recognized. Daniel, the young man from Ironwood who'd spoken up for her. Klaus, grinning and whistling. Elena, looking proud. Diana Silvermane, nodding with satisfaction. And Kael, standing in the front row, watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. After the summit, they walked together through Ravencrest territory. The snow was melting now, early spring finally breaking winter's grip. The forest was coming alive again. "You know what this means, right?" Kael said. "You're not just an advisor anymore. You're a symbol. People are going to look to you, expect things from you." "I know. And you're okay with that?" Alara thought about it. Thought about the girl she'd been 3 months ago, frightened, alone, convinced she'd die in a broken cabin in the middle of nowhere. That girl was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd survived the impossible and turned it into something meaningful. "I'm okay with it," she said, "as long as I don't have to do it alone." Kael stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "You'll never be alone, not as long as I'm here." "Is that a promise, Alpha?" "It's a fact." Kael's expression was serious. "You saved my life, Alara. You gave me my pack back, helped me root out traitors, and started a movement that's changing how Omegas are treated across the entire territory. I owe you everything." "You don't owe me anything. We saved each other." "Then let me say this differently." Kael took her hands, and Alara's breath caught. "I don't want you to stay because you feel obligated, or because it's convenient. I want you to stay because you want to. Because this," he gestured around them, "is home. Because I'm—" He stopped, searching for words. "Because you're what?" Alara prompted. "Because I'm in love with you," Kael said simply. "I have been since you stood beside me facing down an army with nothing but a dull knife and pure stubbornness. Maybe before that. I don't know. But I know I don't want to do this, any of this, without you. Alara's eyes stung. That's a terrible idea. Probably. I'm still figuring out who I am, what I want. I know. And I'm difficult and stubborn, and I have a lot of trauma to work through. I'm aware. Kale's smile was gentle. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking if you'll stay. Build something with me, whatever that looks like. Alara looked at him, this alpha who'd been a dying wolf pup when she found him, who'd trusted her when he had every reason not to, who'd stood beside her and fought for her and believed in her when no one else did. She thought about the cabin in the woods, about survival and loneliness and cold. She thought about warmth, community, purpose. She thought about home. Yes, she said. I'll stay. Kale's relief was visible. He pulled her close, careful of her still healing shoulder, and kissed her. It was gentle, reverent, and absolutely perfect. When they finally broke apart, Alara was smiling. So what now? She asked. Now? Kale grinned. Now we change the world. Together. 6 months later, Alara stood in the clearing where her cabin still stood, weathered but intact. She'd returned several times since the rescue, bringing supplies, making repairs. She'd turned it into a way station for travelers, a safe house for anyone who needed shelter. It felt right, using the place that had kept her alive to help others survive. Kyle was with her, along with a small crew making final improvements. They'd reinforced the roof, replaced the windows, added a proper heating system. It looked almost comfortable now. You could tear it down, Kyle said, watching her examine the notches on the wall. Her count of days survived. Build something new. No, Alara said. It needs to stay. As a reminder. Of what? That survival is possible. That being thrown away doesn't mean being destroyed. She ran her fingers over the marks. That sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the thing that saves you. Kale wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. You saved yourself. We saved each other. They stood like that for a moment, watching the sun set through the trees. Alara Vance had been exiled, abandoned, left to die. Instead, she'd survived. She'd saved a legendary alpha. She'd exposed corruption and started a revolution. She'd gone from outcast to advisor to symbol of change. She'd proven that strength wasn't about designation or status or what pack you belonged to. It was about refusing to give up, about finding meaning in suffering, about turning survival into something bigger than yourself. The Omega they'd thrown away had become the woman who changed everything. And she was just getting started. Back at Ravencrest Hall that evening, there was a celebration. The reforms had passed in 15 packs. Omega advocacy centers were opening across the territory. 3 young Omegas had successfully challenged for leadership positions and won. The world was changing. Alara stood on the balcony, watching the celebration, and felt Kyle's presence beside her. Happy? He asked. Getting there, she said. Still a lot of work to do. Always is, Kyle smiled. But we've got time. Alara leaned against him, letting herself feel safe. Feel home. Once upon a time, she'd been nobody. An Omega without value, without power, without hope. Now she was Alara Vance, survivor, advocate, advisor to the Alpha, and living proof that the world could be better than the one that tried to destroy you. She'd been thrown away. She'd refused to stay down. And in the end, that made all the difference. The frontier had tried to kill her. Winter had tried to break her. The system had tried to erase her. They'd all failed. Because Alara Vance was done being discarded. And the future she was building, with Kyle, with Ravencrest, with every Omega who'd been told they didn't matter, was going to be extraordinary. The girl they threw away had become the woman who couldn't be stopped. And her story was only beginning.